Good morning, Shindo. Again, giving you the details of the news that you're not going to hear just about anywhere else. You will hear a blurb for 30 seconds about things like this, important things like this, if you watch the news. The ceasefire in Syria is over, and now it's time for Russia to blame the United States and the United States to blame Russia. Things are ratcheting up. You will hear this news, I would imagine, anywhere in the world, but the place where it's probably most important to hear, and that's here in the United States, American citizens. I give you news that is important, news that you need to hear, news about the approaching world war, and it all goes back to Syria again. This is from The Guardian. As always, I will be placing the link to this article in the description box. If you like what I do, please click like, subscribe, comment, and share my videos. From The Guardian. U.S. blames Russia after UN convoy in Syria targeted by air attack. UN official says, quote, inexplicable attack could amount to a war crime if bombing which killed aid workers proved to be deliberate. A war crime, folks, is what the UN is calling this. A UN convoy delivering food relief to a rebel-held area near Aleppo was targeted in an airstrike as a week-old ceasefire brokered by Russia and the U.S. collapsed with a new surge of Syrian government bombings. The U.S. said it blamed Russia for the attack on the convoy, whether or not Russian planes were involved, arguing Moscow was responsible under the ceasefire agreement for reining in Bashar al-Assad's government forces. The attack on the convoy, made up of Syrian Red Crescent trucks carrying UN supply food, was reported to have killed at least 12 people and destroyed 18 trucks laden with food intended for tens of thousands of people cut off by the war in a rural area west of Aleppo city. Aid officials said it was hit from the air while unloading food at a warehouse in opposition-controlled Urim al-Kabra. Early reports suggest most of the dead were Syrian Red Crescent drivers. Stephen O'Brien, the UN's emergency relief coordinator, said that the convoy had been clearly marked and its route had been provided to all parties to the conflict. Quote, let me be clear. If this callous act is found to be a deliberate targeting of humanitarians, it would amount to a war crime, unquote, O'Brien said. Quote, I call for an immediate, impartial, and independent investigation into this deadly incident. The perpetrators should know that they will one day be held accountable for violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, unquote. The U.S. State Department spokesman, John Kirby, said in a statement, quote, the destination of this convoy was known to the Syrian regime and the Russian Federation, and yet these aid workers were killed in their attempt to provide relief to the Syrian people, unquote. Kirby added, quote, the United States will raise this issue directly with Russia. Given the egregious violation of the cessation of hostilities, we will reassess the future prospects for cooperation with Russia, unquote. A senior U.S. official made it clear that Washington held Russia primarily responsible. Quote, "We don't know at this point whether it was the Russians or the regime. In either case, the Russians had the responsibility certainly to refrain from taking such action themselves, but they have also the responsibility to keep the regime from doing it," unquote, the official said. Meanwhile, bombs and shells rained down on eastern Aleppo, home to 250,000 people cut off in an opposition-controlled area. The truce collapsed as global leaders convened in the UN in New York with the hopes of consolidating the ceasefire and working on long-term peace efforts. Foreign ministers from around the world in the International Syrian Support Group were due to meet early on Tuesday morning before the start of the UN General Debate. U.S. officials said that the Secretary of State, John Kerry, was trying to contact his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, to assess whether the ceasefire could be salvaged, but hopes of doing so were fast dimming. A senior U.S. official said, quote, "At this point, the Russians have the burden of demonstrating very quickly their seriousness of purpose, because otherwise, as you say, there'll be nothing to extend and nothing to salvage." There was no immediate public comment from Russian officials. Hours before the convoy was struck, Kerry had pointed to the resumption of humanitarian deliveries as a sign that the ceasefire could be starting to bring benefits. But later on Monday, with the ceasefire just short of a week old, the Syrian army issued a statement blaming, quote, "terrorist groups," unquote, for hundreds of alleged violations and saying it would no longer observe the truce. The U.S.-Russian ceasefire, quote, "was supposed to be a real chance to stop the bloodshed, but the armed terrorist group flouted this agreement," unquote, the statement said. However, both Kerry and the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, said Russia and the Syrian government allies had been responsible for the most serious violation. Quote, the reality, according to the information we are getting from the ground, is that violations of the ceasefire are acts of the regime," unquote, Ayrault told reporters at the sidelines of a UN General Assembly meeting in New York. You know, really, do they not know what's going on over there? They don't have like satellites and do we not have some kind of intelligence to tell us exactly what's going on in Syria? I have a very hard time believing that we're still arguing about what really happened. Nonsense. The Syrian army declaration followed the bombing of Syrian army positions around Deir ez-Zor by Western coalition forces, including the U.S., Britain, Denmark, and Australia. The countries involved have said the strikes were aimed at Islamic State frontline positions and unintentionally hit Syrian troops as they fought to take these positions on the Tharda Mountains. There again, I don't believe that. I don't believe that they didn't know that they were going to hit Syrian troops. I mean, either the United States has no intelligence network or they do. It's just very hard for me to believe, with all the technology we have today, that they didn't know that they were firing on Syrian troops. Russia has said the strikes killed 62 Syrian soldiers and injured about 100 others, and Syrian government has described the bombing as, quote, "on purpose and planned in advance," unquote. The collapse of the ceasefire came just as humanitarian convoys had restarted to some of the 18 civilian enclaves cut off by war, 15 of which are besieged by Syrian government forces and their allies, according to the UN. Aid officials had been optimistic that 2 convoys of 20 trucks each might finally reach 250,000 besieged in rebel-controlled eastern Aleppo. John Egeland, the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council and the humanitarian advisor to the UN Special Envoy for Syria, said the Aleppo convoys have been set to depart early on Tuesday morning. But Egeland told The Guardian, quote, "It hinges on so little now. What I fear we now have is a window of opportunity that we hadn't before, and we're not able to use that window of opportunity when we have it," unquote. Now, folks, all of this is just details. All of this is the minutia that is going into what's going to eventually lead to the very brink of a conflict, a world war conflict, which will be Europe, Western Europe, and the United States on one side, and then you've got Russia and maybe even China. Maybe even if China and Russia ally, which is looking like a possibility, then yeah, what we're going to see is the brink. I believe we're going to get up to the very brink, and then it's going to be stopped by a savior type figure. But that's just what I believe. So if you like what I do here, please click like on my videos. There's plenty of people who click the thumbs down on my videos, which buries them. So there's not a lot of reason for me to do these videos if they're buried and then nobody watches them. So please click like. At the very least, click like. Those of you who haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I enjoy your comments even if you disagree with me. However, please, we are adults and we can discuss things as adults, I believe. This is Shindo. Have a good Tuesday.